dull ache in your body as you stirred settled in. The warmth of the blankets felt heavy on you, weighed down by the exhaustion of something deeper, a reminder of the night before. A deep inhale filled your lungs with the scent of clean linens and musk and something unmistakably him. Your brain twitched. It was sluggish, and your fingers started to move against the sheets. And that was when you registered the warmth beside you. Solid, steady. Your eyes blinked open and there he was. Shota Aizawa. His dark hair was unruly, strands falling over his face. A scar under his eye was stark in the soft morning light. He was facing you, one arm tucked over his pillow and the other loosely draped over your waist. His breathing was slow, deep, and unbothered. The memories of the previous night flashed through your mind. His lips on your skin, his voice low, the hands steady despite the fire in their touch. The way he murmured your name, how he held you like he wasn't planning on ever letting go. You swallowed. This was new. You spent the night with him before, danced around the tension, but last night you had crossed the line from unspoken desire into something undeniable. And now waking up next to him, his fingers idly resting against your hip, reality really sunk in. Your fingers twitched against the sheets before you dared to move them carefully. You slid them beneath his arm, rolling onto your back to stare at the ceiling. You were sore, pleasantly so, but your mind was racing. What now? You turned your head, watching as Aizawa sighed in his sleep, and shifted the blanket slightly, revealing more of his scarred chest, his collarbone, the evidence of years spent in battle. You admired him for so long, not as just a mentor, but just as a person. And now you've crossed this threshold into something you couldn't ever take back. The problem was, you didn't want to. Your stomach flipped as you pushed yourself up, gripping the blanket against your chest. His apartment was quiet, save for the distant hum of the city outside. You hesitated before swinging your legs over the edge of the bed, searching for something to wear. Your clothes were scattered across the room, a mix of last night's recklessness and his impatience. You found his shirt, black, oversized, and smelling like him. Without thinking, you tugged it over your head, the fabric hanging loose over your frame. Your pants were somewhere near the couch, but you weren't going to walk through his apartment half naked looking for them. You didn't hear him stir, didn't notice his eyes open, but you felt his presence behind you. You're thinking too much. Aizawa's voice was hoarse with sleep, rough in a way that sent a shiver down your spine. You turned, caught in the act. He was watching you through half-lidded eyes, his head still buried into the pillow. You go to speak, but he beat you to it. Come back to bed. Your heart skipped a beat. Aizawa wasn't overly affectionate. He wasn't really the type to fill the silence, so when he said something, he meant it. You hesitated for a moment before you were close enough to crawl back into the blankets. He tugged you against him, arms locking around your waist. You're not freaking out, he murmured. Should I be? He asked. His voice was still thick with sleep. I don't know, you admitted, your fingers tracing the scars along his forearm. There was a long pause before he spoke. I wouldn't have let things happen if I wasn't sure. This had your breath hitching. You lifted your head to look at him, searching his expression. He was tired, but there was no hesitation in his gaze. So, what does this mean? You asked hesitantly. Aizawa sighed, shifting so that his face was half buried into your hair. It means you need to stop overthinking things. You frowned. I'm not. You are, he countered, voice dry. And you're doing it in my bed, which is unacceptable. Despite yourself, you huffed at a laugh. So demanding. He hummed, his grip around you tightening. Sleep a little longer. You wanted to argue, to push for more answers, but the warmth of his body was seeping into your bones, making you relax around him. The scent of him was surrounding you, his fingers traced your back, lazily. And for now, maybe that was enough. But the steady rise and fall of Aizawa's chest against your back was almost hypnotic. It had been a few hours since you first woken up and fallen back asleep. His warmth, the weight of his arm draped around you, it was grounding, steady, comfortable. Almost too comfortable. It felt odd. You should be panicking, dissecting every little moment that led up to this. But instead, you just laid there, eyes open, staring at the dim light filtering through the curtains. You weren't sure how much time had actually passed since you had stopped and fallen back asleep, but maybe minutes, maybe an hour, maybe a couple of hours, you didn't really know. The problem was, even with his presence surrounding you, your mind couldn't stop running in big circles. You swallowed, exhaling slowly. This was Aizawa, your former teacher, the man that you had respected and admired, and yeah, maybe even crushed on him for a little bit longer than you'd like to admit. And last night, you felt your cheeks burn at the memories resurfacing once again. The way his hands had chased over your skin with the purpose that made your head spin. How he had unraveled you piece by piece with a patience that left you breathless. How he had whispered your name like it meant something more. Like this wasn't a big fat mistake. Still thinking too much? He asked, though it was more like a statement than a question. His voice was rumbling against her shoulder before his lips brushed against them, the exposed skin getting a kiss, lazy and unhurried. You shivered. I can't help it, you mutter, your fingers gripping the blanket softly. Aizawa hummed, shifting so that he could prop himself up on one elbow, his dark hair falling in front of his face as he studied you for a long moment, gaze unreadable. Regretting it? He asked. The question had your stomach twisting and turning. You turned to face him fully, shaking your head almost immediately. No? That seemed to satisfy him, though. He didn't look surprised. Instead, he reached up, tucking a strand of your hair behind your ear. And then what is it? You bit your lips, searching for the right words to say. What happens now? You finally managed to get out of her feet after a few seconds of silence. The silence that followed that was heavy, but he didn't shy away from the question. He'd never really been the type to avoid difficult conversations. This wasn't a mistake, he said simply, echoing your previous thought. Your heart skipped a beat. I told you, I wouldn't have let it happen if it was. If I even thought it was. You swallowed. So you wanted this? He held your gaze, unwavering. I want you. Your breath caught in your throat. Aizawa wasn't the man who spoke up without purpose. He really didn't waste his words, and right now he was looking at you like he had made up a decision in his mind and was waiting for you to try and catch up. Something inside of you cracked, the last of your doubt crumbling under the weight of his certainty. You shifted, and without thinking, your fingers hesitantly brushed over his forearms. So what does that mean? You asked. It means you're not leaving this bed until you stop overthinking every little thing. You let out a startled laugh, your forehead dropping against his shoulder. You're ridiculous. He huffed, but you could feel the way his lips curved against your skin. For a moment, everything felt easy, simple. But then reality creeped back in, reminding you that the world still existed outside of this room. You hesitated, speaking again. People will talk. They already do, he murmured, unaffected. It doesn't change anything. He pulled back, frowning. Doesn't it? His expression didn't shift. I've never cared about anything that people think, and I'm not going to start now. You envied that about him, the ability to move through life without blending into the outside expectations. I don't want to make anything harder for you, you admitted. Aizawa exhaled, dragging your hair through his messy, This isn't one-sided. You know. Your breath hitched. I know. There was another beat of silence before he leaned in, pressing a slow, deliberate kiss to your forehead. Then stop worrying. Really easier said than done. When he kissed you again, this time the lips slow and sure, he decided that maybe, just maybe, for now he was right. A soft murmur of rain against the windows filled the quiet space. The space being Aizawa's apartment. It had been drizzling all afternoon. The sky outside cast a gray, dull sort of mood. The kind that made you want to curl up and stay inside. Which is exactly why you've been doing that for the past few hours. Aizawa sat across from you on the couch, a book in hand, and the other resting lazily on his knee. His hair was still slightly damp from his earlier shower, strands curling slightly at the ends. He was comfortable like this. Loose black shirt, sweatpants, and a mug of tea on the table beside him. The pictures were at ease. You, on the other hand, were failing at being relaxed because Aizawa himself was sat between two piles of case files. I don't get how you do this all the time, you muttered, rubbing your temples as you stared at the folder in your lap. Aizawa didn't look up from his book. You get used to it. That's a lie, you caught back. His lips twitched slightly. Maybe. You sighed, flipping the page and skimming the details of the report for what felt like the 10th time. Ever since you had slowly stepped into the hero world, you'd gained an entirely new appreciation for the work, Aizawa put in behind the scenes. Being a new graduate, field work was one thing, but the paperwork was completely new to you. It was its own form of complete torture. A comfortable silence settled between the two of you as you worked. The sound of rain filling the gaps every now and then. Aizawa would turn a page in his book, or you'd shift to get comfortable, but otherwise it was peaceful. Too peaceful. You exhaled, stretching your arms over your head before flopping against the couch. Ugh, I need a break. Aizawa hummed. You need to finish reading. I will. Later, you shot back. You say that, but later never comes. You groaned dramatically, throwing an arm over your face. Are you always this relentless? You knew what you were getting into, he warned. You peeked at him beneath your arms, narrowing your eyes. You enjoy this, don't you? I enjoy efficiency, he said. You snorted. Liar. He didn't argue, but the slight quirk of his lips gave him away. A beat of silence passed before you sat back up, rubbing at the back of your neck. Fine, but after this, you owe me dinner. Aizawa arched the brow. I owe you? He asked. Yes, as emotional compensation. You snarked. He sighed, setting his book down on the coffee table. What do you want? You tilted your head in thought. Something warm. Ooh, maybe ramen. Easy enough. You grinned. See? You do care. Don't push it. He laughed, picking up your file again. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, and for a while the two of you fell back into that quiet rhythm of work. But somewhere in the middle of renewing the file, you found yourself distracted. Not just by the paperwork, but by Aizawa himself. The way he absentmindedly tapped his fingers against his knees, he read. The way his eyes moved across the page with quiet focus, and the way his presence alone made the room feel less stifling, even if it was buried in work. You had no idea how you'd even gotten here. Not in his apartment surrounded by the mundane, but here, with him. It was surreal sometimes, knowing that the man you admired for so long was now strangely a part of your life in a way you never really expected. The shift from a former student to something more had been gradual, subtle, but undeniable. Aizawa wasn't the type to rush into things. He was careful, methodical and patient, and yet with you, he had allowed a different side of himself to resurface, a side that wasn't just a mentor or a hero, but a man. You wondered if he ever looked at it the way you did, if he ever saw the situation the way you did, and wondered how you ended up here. Lost in thought, you barely noticed when Aizawa set his book aside and stretched, rolling his shoulders before standing up. I'll start the ramen, he said, already heading towards the kitchen. You blinked, snapping out of your daze. Wait, you're actually gonna do it? He glanced over his shoulder. You want dinner, didn't you? You scrambled up from the couch, trailing after him. Yeah, but I just thought you'd, order takeout or something. I could. He pulled open a cabinet, grabbing a pot. But it's faster this way. You leaned against the counter, watching as he moved across the small kitchen with practiced ease. It was oddly domestic, seeing him like this, sleeves pushed up, quietly preparing a meal. I didn't think you could cook, he mused. I don't, really, he admitted. Just enough to get by. You smirked. So you're saying I shouldn't get my hopes up? That depends on your standard. You laughed, nudging his arm playfully. Well, my expectations are now dangerously high, so good luck. Aizawa shook his head but didn't push you away. Instead, he continued his work, the smell of broth and seasoning filling the space. You watched him in silence for a moment before speaking again. You know, you said, your voice softer now. I like this. He didn't even look up, but the way that his shoulders tensed slightly. Like what? This? You gestured vaguely. Us? Just existing like this? He glanced at you for a moment before finally glancing back. His gaze was steady, unreadable, but there was something softer in it, something unreadable. Me too, he admitted. Your heart skipped a beat. Aizawa wasn't the type for grand declarations or flowery words or unnecessary sentimentality, but when he did say something, he meant it. And right now, standing in his kitchen watching him cook dinner after an afternoon of quiet companionship, you realized just how much those two words meant. You swallowed past the warmth rising in your chest, offering a small smile. Good. He huffed, shaking his head as he turned back to the stove. You're ridiculous. Yeah. You waved a hand. Just don't burn it, and I won't hold it against you. Aizawa sighed, but there was a faint trace of a smile on his lips. And for the first time in a while, you felt completely at ease. But the air in Aizawa's apartment was thick with warmth, the scent lingering from the broth and the spice from dinner clinging up the space. It had been a little bit, and the rain hadn't let up, tapping steadily against the windows outside. The city was now blurred in streaks of neon and shadow. You leaned back against the couch, stretching your legs out as you watched Aizawa collect empty bowls and setting them in the sink. The simple task of it all felt new. Comfortable, but new. And maybe that's why the tension felt heavier tonight. It wasn't just the first time you stayed over. It wasn't the first time you'd spent a long, quiet evening together, lost in the conversation or the comfortable silence. It wasn't any of those things. Aizawa leaned against the counter, rubbing a hand over the back of his neck before finally looking at you. His gaze was sharp, but not in the way that was intimidating, like when you were his student and he would scold you. No, the way he was looking at you now was far more dangerous. You're staring, he murmured. You have to quiet laugh. Maybe. He tilted his head slightly, studying you. You've been doing that all night. You shrugged, trying your best to play it off, but your stomach clenched under his attention. You're easy to look at. Aizawa didn't react right away, just watched you with that same unreadable expression that he always had. But then he pushed off the counter, walking towards you with slow, deliberate steps. You're not subtle, he mused, stopping just in front of where you sat. You tilted your head back to meet his gaze. Neither are you. Aizawa exhaled through his nose, amusement flickering in his expression, but then without a word he reached out, his fingers rushing over your jaw in a touch that was so light that it sent a shiver down your spine. The heat that had been simmering between you two all evening flared instantly. He didn't rush, he never did. Instead, his fingers trailed down the side of your face, down the curve of your throat. His touch was feather light, but firm enough to leave goosebumps in its wake. Your breath caught. "Are you just gonna tease me?" you asked. Aizawa hummed, his hand sliding further down and his knuckles grazed your collarbone. "Depends." "On what?" you asked. His lips quirked slightly, but he didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned in so close that his breath coasted over your cheek. "On how patient you're willing to be." You swallowed. That slow, creeping anticipation made your skin prickle up with heat. Aizawa had always been so controlled, so you didn't even know how to explain it, just so in charge, and it drove you insane. With a frustrated sigh, you reached for him, fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt to tack him down, closing the space between you two. His lips met yours in a slow, deliberate kiss, a one that sent a deep pulse of heat straight through you. His hands on your waist, fingers pressing just enough to ground you, to remind you that he was still in control of the pace, and damn, he knew exactly what he was doing. The kiss deepened, his mouth moving against yours with that lazy kind of dominance, the way he had all the time. He tasted like tea and something faintly sweet, his tongue teasing against yours just enough to make your breath hitch. Aizawa pulled back slightly, his lips just brushing against yours as he murmured, "Impatient." You huffed, rolling your eyes. "You're insufferable." He chuckled low and deep, and the sound settled into your stomach like embers waiting to catch flame. "And you're still here." You opened your mouth to argue, but he stole your words with another kiss. This one was firmer and a little rougher. The shift made his heat pool in the low of your stomach, fingers tightening in his shirt as he pulled him closer. Aizawa let you take up for a moment before he pressed you into him, letting you set the pace, but only for a moment. Then without warning, he shifted, grabbing your wrist and flipping the script entirely. 1 second you were tugging him down to you, and the next he had you pinned against the couch, his weight pressing just enough to make your breath stutter. His knees slid between yours, and his hands found the curve of your jaw, tilting your head just enough to the side so he could drag his lips across the curve of your throat. A slow, heated trail of kisses followed. His mouth was warm against your skin, his breath hot as he lingered just below your ear. You felt the way his lips quirked when he found the sensitive spot, the way his fingers flexed on against your hip when you let out an unintentional sound. "You make this too easy," he murmured against your skin. You shivered, fingers digging into his shoulders. "It's not my fault, you're—" Aizawa picked down just enough to make you gasp, cutting you off intentionally. Your thoughts scattered. Smug bastard. Your hands moved without thinking, slipping under her shirt and tracing the scars and the muscles you'd memorized by now. He exhaled slowly. The sound was rough against your ear, but he didn't stop you. If anything, it encouraged him. His hands slid under your shirt, fingers dragging against your spine in a slow, deliberate touch. He didn't rush, he didn't fumble, he just took his time, mapping out every reaction, every little shift in your breathing, and it was working. Your head tipped back against the couch as his lips returned to yours. His grip was tight as he pressed you closer. Every movement was calculated, but there was that quiet hunger beneath it. The one that was unrestrained and undeniable, but you wanted more, so you took it. You shifted suddenly, using the distraction of his kiss to push up, reversing your positions. Aizawa huffed, a quiet sound of amusement, as you slid into his lap, your fingers sliding up into his hair and tugging just enough to earn a reaction. His eyes darkened. "Playing dirty?" he asked. You smirked, leaning down until your lips were just barely brushing against his. "Maybe?" he giggled. Aizawa's hands flexed against your thighs, his grip was tight and grounding. "Careful, baby." You arched a brow. "Or what?" His lips curved into a slow, numbing smirk, and then he moved, a sharp tug of the weight, and suddenly you weren't on top anymore. A startled breath left you as you landed on the couch once more, Aizawa caged you in without effort, his gaze burning into you as he looked down at you, the faintest glint of a mischievous smirk hidden beneath his usual expression. You still think you're in control, he mused. You swallowed. Maybe, he hummed, until his lips were just above yours. Cute. And then he kissed you again, slow, deliberate, and just satisfying. And this time there was no mistaking exactly where this night was heading.